Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Robin, 1 year ago, you and I were preparing to go to New York, and we were going to bring a plate to the Bronx Historical Society.
Yes.
It was a plate my mom had hanging up in her kitchen all of my life, and before she died, she asked me if I wanted anything. And the only thing I wanted was that plate, not for myself, but I wanted to bring it to the church that was depicted in the artwork on the plate, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that church apparently wasn't a church anymore, or wouldn't be much longer. So then you suggested, how about like a museum or something? Well, we discovered the Bronx Historical Society, right?
Yeah.
And we went to it, and I guess you call that the Lower Bronx or South Bronx. And we brought the plate into them, and they were so happy. And there was so much rich history about the Bronx that I was just unaware of, because I moved from the Bronx as a child to Long Island, so I didn't really have any childhood memories of the Bronx. But the lady who we gave it to was just filled with information. The two things that came together, which I thought were really interesting, were Edgar Allan Poe and Grandmaster Flash.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It was It was amazing that she has this connection and this way of teaching kids, I guess, about the literature of Edgar Allan Poe. I guess the writing of him, because I guess he lived there for a while, and the origins of hip hop. So with that said, we have Vikki Toback on the phone. She has written this book called Contact High, A Visual History of Hip Hop. She is the founding curator of, oh my gosh, Photo DC's film program. Is that right? Mm-hmm. A lecturer on music photography, a producer, a columnist for CBS Market Watch. Wow. CNN, Bloomberg News, Tech TV, and she's on our little show. That's awesome. Vikki Toback, it's an honor to have you on our show. Good morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So tell me about the book.
So, I'm happy to hear you talking about the Bronx to start it off, because that's really the place to start. So the book traces the past 40 plus years of hip hop visual culture. So I for the past several years spent my time digging in archives, shoeboxes, basements, visiting all the photographers that have been documenting hip hop from the start, getting their never before seen contact sheets, hearing their stories about how the photographs were created, and created this book that, starts in the late 70s in the Bronx. Our first photo in the book is of DJ Kool Herc, who was an immigrant from Jamaica who brought over, sound system culture, and hip hop was born. And we start there, and then it progresses to modern day with all those iconic images of all the artists, album covers, candids, that really tell the big story of hip hop.
And the story of hip hop is a story of telling stories or expressing emotions, maybe is a better way to say it, because the way it sounds to me, and I am not a big hip hop, please forgive me, I don't want anybody who is a hip hop fan to cringe at my dopey older white guy questions, but I think that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I have to explain it. However, I am a fan of people expressing themselves, and that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like very articulate expression of whatever's going on in one's life.
Well, absolutely. And, this book is so much more, than just, talking about lyrics or this or that. I mean, this book is about, youth culture and rebellion and giving voice to, a music that was created really out of nothing. And, also telling the story of these photographers who were part of the culture, that they decided to point their cameras at something that was really not mainstream as it is today. They saw something like, these are these kids expressing themselves, and this is important to document. And so I was more fascinated, by all those themes too. Also, by showing the contact sheets of the photographers and showing the outtakes, you show the mistakes of all the outtakes, and the artists as they were creating themselves, and the photographers as they were creating themselves. So, it really has these kind of universal themes. So even if you're not a fan of, the, whatever, Lil Yachty or whoever, like it's really bigger than that.
You have images of the hip hop artists from the beginning of their careers, and then you also have images of some of the artists that have died, like a few weeks they were taken before their death, unexpected death.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. The image that you're referring to is the Baron Claiborne photograph of Biggie Smalls in The Crown, which is really, very representative of, this kind of imagery that we kind of have ingrained. Like that image has made its way to murals and around the world. And yeah, so that photo sort of memorialized Biggie. It was taken just a few days before he got on a plane to Los Angeles, where he was killed in a drive-by shooting. So there's photos that definitely stand as memorials to certain artists. We have Tupac, by Danny Clinch in there, which is a very iconic photograph. And talking about their collaboration and the way that Tupac wanted to be portrayed and remembered. And, then you have smaller artists like Big L, who was photographed with all his friends in his neighborhood in Harlem for his debut album, and then, was unfortunately killed a few years later. So, so these photos stand as memorials, and they stand as, a testament to the lasting power of these images.
I think the one thing that usually happens when there happens to be somebody with a camera early on at the advent of something that's later on going to be big is that they don't even realize the importance of what they've just taken a picture of, or the significance of that moment that was captured, whether it's the person in the picture or just the venue they're playing at.
That's right. It's photos. I mean, music, we know what music sounds like. We hear the lyrics, we hear, the messaging, but, we have to remember, like, in the days before Instagram and, media, like, you didn't really know what your artist looked like until you saw their album in the store, or until you saw them on a magazine cover, or, until you, like, saw a candid photo of them somewhere. But images, and then when you saw them, you're like, oh, that's who they are. That's what they look like. Those images, but before the days of Instagram, you didn't really have that real time matching of like imagery and the music.
So, Vicki, this goes back to what year? Is it the late '60s or the early '70s?
So this goes. Our first shoot kicks off in 1979. Okay. Even though hip hop started like in the mid to early 70s, you could say. But our first shoot kicks off in 1979 in the Bronx with Cool Herc. And then, you can see even images to current day, like early images of Kendrick Lamar in the studio, recording some of his early demos. And then you have, images from the 90s and the 2000s when hip hop was really becoming more mainstream, with having hits on the radio with like, Diddy and Biggie. And so it really takes you from a small subculture, kids, creating things for themselves to this music that's now defines our mainstream.
I like Queen Latifah, and I never really thought of her as a hip hop artist.
Well, yeah, now she's Queen Latifah, but she very much started out, out of Newark, New Jersey as Queen Latifah, as part of a crew called, Flavor Unit. she was really important in the early days of women and hip hop. And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that was something with creating this book, the importance of telling, the story of women in hip hop and how they were portrayed. Today you have people like Nicki Minaj, who's a lot more sexy, Cardi B, but Latifah she looks very, very Afrocentric and powerful. There's also images of like Salt and Peppa early on, and they're wearing these amazing, Dapper Dan designed jackets. And so it talks about, the book also shows that women in hip hop are varied, whether they're highly sexual or whether they're tomboys or whether, they are like claiming their, intellectual prowess. But it shows a range of all those images, and it kind of reclaims it for those women to say, we can have our image be whatever we want. And it's varied.
Is there a line between hip hop and mainstream? Have any of those artists crossed it?
What do you mean by that? Do you mean like underground hip hop and then mainstream?
Right, exactly. Like they changed their, all of a sudden they changed their genre and just wanted to go into the mainstream, and you can't tell their hip hop roots anymore from the songs they're doing now.
Oh, they're watered down?
Oh, well, I mean, I think because hip hop itself has become the mainstream, you still have underground hip hop for sure, but, hip hop itself is very mainstream, and you've seen artists, LL Cool J, Queen Latifah, Method Man. I mean, they've become actors, they've become media personalities. They have grown up with the music, and they've grown up with the culture. So, it's become the dominant voice, I think, for us. And so, the early artists have grown up right along with it.
Yeah. How the book is doing really well. I'm looking at it on Amazon right now, and at least on Amazon, it's got a couple of different high numbers. Number 4 in the photography category, number 8 in the portraits and selfies category, and in the rap category, it's number 9. So it looks like you've got a following of people who are interested in photography, as well as people who are simply interested in music. Are you getting different feedback from those two different groups?
Yeah, and that's been really cool for all of this, because if you are not into hip hop at all, but you're into photography, like this book, you can immerse in it just looking at the outtakes and the process and what camera the photographer used and what flash or no flash. And then for music fans who maybe don't know about the craft or history of photography or who these photographers were, they can engage in that way. Bringing those two together has been really amazing for me as someone who loves both, as both someone who has been a longtime fan of the music and loves photography.
Do the photographs depict the early days of the hip hop artists as poor, as not having much money, in the same way that the early photographs of the rock and roll era, I mean, the Beatles and all those guys, Elvis Presley, they all looked very poor. They didn't look like they had much. And by the time the hip-hop scene had come around, the music industry had become so corporate, I guess, for lack of a better word, that they were only looking for, I guess, they had become homogenized or whatever, the record industry, I should say. And so this thing that bubbled up in Brooklyn, correct everything I've got that's wrong, by the way. I'm just trying to say what I think I know. But it sounds like it bubbled up again in the same way that rock and roll bubbled up in the 50s, right? And so once again, you have poor kids changing the way music sounded.
That's right. I mean, that's, so much music is rooted in, pain and, socioeconomic, issues and things like that. I mean, the music is rooted in all of that. And so, yes, the beginnings of hip hop, and in the Bronx, and you see that in the book too. Like, many of the early photos are of neighborhoods and spaces like roller rinks or parks where the music was born, because it wasn't getting any play on radio or in mainstream venues or things like that. So you really see the come up. You see these neighborhoods. The hip hop was born during like Bronx's burning years. That's what it was called in the Bronx. And so, yeah, the roots of black music and of rock and roll are rooted in struggle. A lot of it is, and I think that that maybe has been lost to history, but hopefully this book can serve as a little bit of storytelling behind that story.
You have a huge responsibility to the fans of hip hop and just the photographers for their own fan clubs. So this is a huge project to undertake. How did you get the photographers to trust you that their photographs would be their photographs and their narratives would be held in the best light possible?
Yeah, I'm so thankful to, we have over 50 photographers in this book, and earning that trust from them, trusting me with their negatives and their archives is huge, and I thank them all. A lot. So I started out working in the music business in the early 90s. I actually worked with a lot of the hip hop groups and met many of the photographers back then. So there was a handful of photographers that were like, yes, like, we know you, we remember you from, working with the artists. So a handful of the photographers I knew and had a long-term relationship with, and some of the newer photographers, I reached out to them and just said, this is what we're doing. This is these are your colleagues that are already part of the project, and they loved it so much. And also photographers love seeing each other's contact sheets and negatives. Mm-hmm. It's like a little, secret workflow that they don't often get to see of others. So they really love, the spirit of the project. So it's been really amazing to kind of make this a group story about their
very cool
community too.
Yeah. We had on the show Arlene Alda. She's the wife of Alan Alda, is that his name? Alan? The actor. Uh-huh. And she wrote a book called Kids from the Bronx. And one of the people she interviewed for the book was Mel, please forgive me, I'm hard with these things. Grandmaster Mel, the hip hop artist.
Oh, Grandmaster Melly Mel. Yeah.
Melly, thank you. You can tell it's a little bit awkward for me, but I found it fascinating just hearing his story, and again, it kind of seems to be reflected in the photographs that are in the book.
Yeah, I mean, the art, these early artists, we have, and Grandmaster Melly Mel is definitely a big part of the book. The early artists where, photographers often were their friends, or, were just kind of around. They didn't really know, a lot of the photographs were more candid. So, there's a photographer, Joe Conzo, who went to school in the Bronx. He started photographing when he was just in high school, and he photographed, Melly Mel and Cold Crush Brothers and a lot of the early Bronx artists, because he was their classmate, and he just would go out to nightclubs with them and take photos, and those photos would then be used on flyers to promote their next shows. So they were never meant to be, in magazines and things like that. Like that. Yeah, like that wasn't even, a thing at the time. So, it was just a lot more grassroots.
It's just a fascinating thing. I think it's fascinating how history kind of puts itself together and leaves clues, and with photography, it's probably the best clue ever, because you can feel what's going on at that time. There's a certain thing beyond visual that it's hard to explain. But we all know. I mean, everybody knows what I'm talking about. You look at an old photo and you see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's something very visceral, like the way you hear a song and you feel emotions. It's like you see a photo and you feel the emotion. There's something, the impact of both music and visuals it comes from that same place. So it's just a really beautiful way to like celebrate the culture.
Do you know who came up with the term hip hop? Because the term hip seems pretty old, from like the 50s. And how did they come up with that term hip hop?
So as the story goes, when hip hop was making its way in the clubs in the Bronx, it started out as kind of DJ focused, and the MC, they would kind of be like a hype man a little. They would get on the mic and they would just kind of stream of consciousness, like say whatever came to mind. And as the story goes, like the MCs would get up and they would just be like a hip hop, a hippity hop, a hip hop on the mic, as like it was just kind of like a stream of consciousness thing that they said over the beat, and it became a thing. And here we are, all these years later.
It is amazing to kind of look back and see how something developed and became part of our culture. Let's see. Again, it is called Contact High, A Visual History of Hip Hop. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a different website that you'd like to recommend?
So Amazon is great. It's Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's in bookstores everywhere books are sold. And it's actually released today, so definitely have a look. I think both music and photography enthusiasts will love it, and I'm so glad to be talking to you guys about it today.
Well, thank you for doing that.
When the photographers were asked to have pieces in there written by their photographs, did you interview them one-on-one, or did they write their own narrative and give it to you, or how did that happen?
I interviewed every photographer about each one of the shoots in there, and it was definitely a labor of love, but I loved hearing their stories. Photographers have amazing stories, like behind the scenes stories that I mean, because they're seeing the artist at their most vulnerable, most intimate, most everything, and traveling with them to various places. So the stories behind these photos was great, and every photographer, I spent time with them over the past few years, interviewing them and getting these stories.
Wow. And did any of them go on to make photography their life, or did any of them take other paths? I mean, were there the lives that followed for the photographers, were they in line with what they were doing when they were younger?
So most of them are working professional photographers, which is great. I mean, Danny Clinch, for example, he's out there on tour with Bruce Springsteen. He is one of the best known photographers out there. But, Joe Conzo spent his life as a firefighter in the Bronx and just retired, but was also, taking photos on the side. I mean, the photographers, they have great personal stories themselves. We touch upon some of those in the book, and they're pretty varied. But for the most part, everyone is out there having a great career, still taking photos and still pushing the story forward. Nice.
Vicki, it's an honor to have you on our show. Vikki, Toback, thank you so much. Again, the book is called Contact High, A Visual History of Hip Hop, and contacthighproject.com, I think, right? And Amazon and wherever books are sold, I'm sure. Thank you, Vikki.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
With a graduate degree in management and leadership from Webster University, there'll never be a better time for you to explore what's next in your career. Classes are scheduled so you can continue your normal workday routine, and the accelerated program means a new term starts about every 10 weeks. If you're looking to gain a broad general management and leadership perspective, then Webster University's Management and Leadership degree program is the right one for you. It's all a part of what's next at Webster University.
Go to webster.edu/manage, accredited by ACBSP.
Hi, I'm Russ Moore with Pac Mill. Our relationship with WOCA started in 2009. WOCA is family-friendly, community-involved station. When we moved to our new location on 17th Street in October of 2016, of course, we went